Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, and I've got a fascinating topic that we're going to be discussing today. It's called Loving the Unlovable. So we've got an expert. Her name is Alexis Donkin. She is a fabulous intuitive life coach that I've invited on today's podcast to talk about loving the unlovable. So welcome, Alexis.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
My pleasure. And I love this topic, loving the unlovable, because off air you did speak about that not just being in relation to yourself, but with other people. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So I think that one of the biggest problems that we have right now actually is, as people, as humans, is loving and accepting those parts of ourselves that are unlovable. And a lot of people talk about that. And then when we connect that with loving the unlovable parts of other people, that's when some real magic can happen. So I think it's really, really important that we look at both sides of that.
So in terms of when you're talking about the unlovable, what sort of things are you referring to specifically?
Well, if we're talking about ourselves, we could be thinking about those parts of ourselves that we like to hide. You know, the parts that we feel ashamed of. Some people use the Jungian term shadow to talk about those kinds of things. So embracing those parts of ourselves and accepting them, that's when we can kind of learn to move past them and through them. It can also mean rewriting some of the stories that we've been telling ourselves about how worthy we are. You know, if we're not producing a lot of times in our adult life, we feel like our value is tied to our work. And so for people who are not getting paid for their work, they may feel like they're not as valued. And so separating value from what you're doing, but just how you are being, can be a really important transition. And then when we're looking at people outside of ourselves, maybe our spouse or our kids or the neighbor or a politician, you know, there's a lot of things we could say that might be unlovable. And this is it's kind of like a Buddhist approach, I would almost say, is just seeing the humanity and seeing that even those parts and those other people that we don't like are part of an overall package. And so the individual pieces might be, you know, a pothole or, you know, a detour or something like that. But when we look at the overall picture, it's beautiful and we actually want it in our life. And so that's when we can kind of really enjoy and start to really connect with the people around us.
So you're not specifically referring to then when we say that, for example, we're in a relationship, whether that's a married partner or a long-term relationship or short-term relationship, and you're putting up with unacceptable behavior. That's not what you're talking about.
No, not at all. I mean, if someone is doing something that's actually hurtful, that's a whole other ball game. But like, let's say you're in a otherwise reasonable relationship, and your partner is they're just leaving their dirty socks on the floor, or you know, they're not they're not putting the bath mat up after they've taken a shower, something like that. I mean, these are things that they might be annoying, and they might be things that, like, if you weren't dating this person, or if you weren't married to this person, you might get frustrated with, and you would be like, I'm not putting up with this. But because it's part of the package, you're like, actually, I'm grateful that this person is here. And this is a sign that they're here and present with me, and that that I get to have them in my life. Does that mean that they should not be putting up the bath mat? No, but it is a kind of a different way of approaching it and seeing it, because the person is flawed. I mean, we're all flawed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you just have to kind of give space for people to be themselves in with that imperfection, and see it for the beauty that it is.
And I suppose what I term not sweating the small stuff, basically.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And it can help, if you're going through a rough patch in a relationship, that can really transform it, is when if you're focusing on all of the little things that you find annoying, that you find frustrating, they're going to build up, they're going to compound, and they're going to make, the small things are going to become big things. But if you're able to kind of switch, shift the focus and kind of change the story that you're telling yourself about this person, then you're going to be able to, have you're going to say, yeah, no, actually, I do value this relationship. Actually, I do value having even these little frustrating bits about them. And then you're also going to put in a little more effort, to healing those parts that maybe aren't going so well.
Absolutely. So otherwise it just builds up to a huge resentment internally, doesn't it? That could eventually lead to the straw breaking the camel's back over stupid little incidents, really, that need not have become a big deal.
Absolutely.
So could you give us a practical example then? Say if you were talking to a girlfriend, let's say, or a client, and they were saying the one thing that their partner does that really irritates them is them leaving their clothes on the floor, for example, like you give the socks example. What would you say would be a good reframe to say to yourself to switch that situation to make it acceptable and not worth sweating about?
Well, there's a couple of things that I would say. One is, make sure that this isn't part of a larger pattern. Because if it is, then you're going to have a different conversation. But if it's one of those things where it's just like you're already frustrated and it's just a little thing, then I really recommend that it's like, okay, I'm grateful that they're here. I'm grateful that they're in my life, that I get to live with them and I get to spend my time with them, and that they have clothing that I get to wash. Which I know it sounds like, what? But I mean, yeah. but really, because the other option is you don't. They're not there. There isn't a partner's clothing to wash. They're gone. And that's an emptiness. That's sad. That's not something that you want. You actually want this person to be here. So even though it's frustrating, it's also like, thank God this person is here with me, and I get the privilege of doing those things for them. And it totally changes how you feel about it. It's like, I do this with my kids too. Like if they're dropping crumbs and stuff, I'm like, I'm grateful that I get to do this, So any of those little kinds of things that annoy you, you can just think like the alternative is they're not here, and I want them to be here. So I want this, and I choose this. And it really shows.
I mean, that's a great response, but what would be maybe your words of advice around the conversation with the partner about it? Would you suggest they, have a conversation about it, or just literally reframe it in their own head?
It's like I said, it's definitely like a two-prong. Like you want to change how you're thinking about it, and you also want to have a conversation. Although I will say that when you start to reframe things, your behavior to your partner will change, and that will change the dynamic in your relationship, and they may be more interested and more willing to do things for you. So, you may start telling yourself, I'm grateful that this person is here with me, and then you're going to be kinder to them. you're going to treat them like the treasure that they are, you know, because they're bringing you these wonderful things to your life that you appreciate. And then when you say, hey, I really want you to be putting your clothes directly into the hamper, or when the laundry gets really full, I really need you to put your clothes a load into the washing machine. Can you do that for me? They're going to be more receptive, and they're going to say, oh, yeah, I can do that. And you can even take it a step further and say, this is a way you can show me love.
Wow.
You know, and because it is, you know,
Yeah.
these little acts that we do are expressions of love. So if that's a way, if acts of service is a way that you like to be shown love, you need to say that. You know, you need to say, I mean, there was a time in my marriage that my husband, he really, I wasn't very good at complimenting him. I'll own that. And he said, I really need compliments. I really need you to tell me nice things. So I said, okay, I can do that. And so I started doing that. But you have to have that conversation. If you don't tell the person what you need, how you want to be shown love, and how you want to be cared for, they're not going to know. You can't assume that they'll know. And so that's another, you know, that's kind of like the next step of kind of healing and getting to a better place in your relationship.
100% agree. And it's a far kinder way of communicating rather than finger pointing and getting angry and laying blame, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all have our moments where we're going to yell at each other, especially those closest to it. And also, after you do that, you know, you want to say, hey, I'm really sorry that I yelled at you. I was just getting frustrated. And can you do, you know, you have this kinder conversation, and it will be received better.
Absolutely. And I love that you said, you know, it's a two-pronged attack, and first of all, reframe it in your own head, and then you're going to be coming at it from a place of love, aren't you? Rather than from a place of frustration when you do have that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I was an interesting thing that I also learned on my journey, and I think it was something by John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And he said that men respond better to, rather than can you or could you, to changing that to will you or would you. In other words, the W words rather than the C words. Because he says, think about it. When a man proposes, he doesn't say, can you marry me? He says, will you marry me?
There you go.
And apparently that is something that works better with men, because it then doesn't come across as you questioning whether they're capable of doing it or not. It comes across as, you know, something you would like.
Yeah.
So yeah, just an interesting observation that when you were talking about the can and could, I thought, maybe I need to share this.
There you go.
So in terms of loving the unlovable, what made you sort of, I suppose, become an expert or specialize around this subject, Alexis? Or did you have your own personal story around this?
Well, I think that everybody has a message that's kind of engraved in their heart. If you dig down a little bit, you'll find it. And some of us, it's carved in really deep, and so it's there's no avoiding it. And for me, that was love. And I don't just mean like romantic love, I mean all love. I think that it actually started when I was in Central America, and I was on a mission trip of all things. And I was just listening to stories of people talking about it, in particular in Nicaragua. I was listening to stories of people talking about their experience of the war. And I listened to a number of different stories from different perspectives, and I just didn't want to participate in that anymore. I didn't want to be part of a machine. And it kind of, that experience kind of started me down a path of looking at how we treat each other as humans. and then the ways in which we could get better at treating one another. And I kind of, it slowly evolved into this this pursuit of compassion in particular, and then thinking about compassion for myself. And that's kind of where the idea of loving the unlovable originally, like that phrase, and when I use that, when I'm talking about that, that's usually what I'm kind of focused on, but also kind of loving the unlovable in other people. As I've gone through in my practice with my clients, with myself, just thinking about those things, and really embodying the golden rule, treating others as you wish to be treated, loving yourself as you love others, and loving others as you love yourself. It's one of those universal tenets of all ethical codes and spiritual codes. And there's a reason. So
in terms of sharing a practical example, would you mind sharing with the audience about what did you find for yourself was unlovable that you worked on?
So when I first started thinking about that, I had a moment in my life. I was 7 months pregnant with my first child, and my husband lost his job. And I'm in the US, and at that time, if you didn't have a good job, you didn't have health insurance.
Right.
And so we lost our health insurance. And that kind of sent us on this whole spiral of like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? What's going to happen? And I had to really confront these feelings of frustration, of shame, of unworthiness. So I kind of systematically went through all these pieces of myself that I found shameful, that really needed to be worked.
And what specifically did you find shameful in that situation, Alexis, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I mean, I was a gifted kid who was supposed to be, everybody always expected that I would have, that I would do all the things and that I would be, successful. And of course, now we know that gifted kids don't necessarily, giftedness isn't necessarily tied to success. Certainly not financial success, that it's just, they need different stuff at school.
Yes.
That's the only thing. And so, I had been told, and I had these expectations for my life. And instead, as an adult, I found myself in a series of economic crashes, wars, bad labor markets, all these different things, not having, not being able to buy a house, those kinds of things, that previous generations just didn't have to deal with. And so, being told that you were allowed, that you were supposed to, that you were entitled to these things, and then being confronted by the reality that that's not going to happen. It's not going to be like that. And then does that mean that I'm not good enough? Does it mean that I did something wrong? Of course not. But and if you think about it for 5 seconds or longer, you realize that no, of course not. There's things that are forces that are out in the world that we have no control over, that we have to work within. And so confronting those pieces in ourselves, accepting the fact that you are powerful, that you do have amazing abilities, that your worth is not tied to what you produce or what somebody else says about you. Sorry, I'm getting so emotional because
No, it's good. It's good that you're getting emotional, because I can tell you're really feeling into this and are passionate about what you're speaking about.
It's such a sadness to see all these people feel so much pain around this, you know, to have been promised things culturally, you know, within families and with all these different things, and then to not, you know, to not get them, to not be cared for culturally in a society. It's awful. But that doesn't mean that you're any less human.
No, of course not. And but we do put these unrealistic pressures and expectations on ourselves sometimes, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, I mean, I think it's really important to say it's not just ourselves. You know, like you can do the work, but unfortunately, a lot of it is aftercare. I feel like, you know, it's not, because the way that we've structured the world is just not taking care of people as well as we need to. And I think owning the fact that, like, yeah, we're doing aftercare. You know, like a lot of this conversation is about aftercare. It's about like accepting the fact that, like, these are these big forces that we don't have control over, and it's okay. Like you're like, it's not, you can't expect that this is going to work out a certain way. And this is where I'm going to offer another reframe, is if you think about it like a game, it takes the pressure off. You know, you have to say, okay, these are the rules of the game, and I'm just going to play and see how much fun I can have and how much success I can have. And if I lose some, it's not a big deal. And if I gain some, it's also not a big deal. It's just a game, and I'm just going to have fun. And it doesn't say anything about me and my value and my worthiness, and whether or not, you know, I'm still human. It's still good and important for me to be here living my life and being who I am.
Absolutely. I feel a good phrase that I use quite often is, if I'm going through some sort of challenging period, I just, you know, observe it and just think to myself, this is interesting. I wonder why this is happening. and just observe it, you know, and not get emotional around it either way, not think of it as being a good thing or a bad thing, just thinking, this is interesting, and what am I meant to learn from this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's it. I mean, you know, that's the idea. Like, if you want to think about it as a game, if you want to be like, hey, what am I going to learn from this? I mean, just kind of like a less attached to what's going to happen, and maybe a sense of curiosity about it. That it really helps. Like, just kind of like, okay, and then you move through it. And the reality is, like, moving through the challenges is also great.
Absolutely. And I like to reinforce that, you know, that we've been successful 100% of the time of overcoming our previous challenges.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think it's worth, you know, knowing in your own head that it's only going to be temporary, and you've overcome your previous challenges and you'll overcome this one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Alexis, any final words around loving the unlovable that you feel we're not covered, in terms of either related to the self or relating to others?
I just say that I think when you're thinking about yourself, there's three things that I want people to kind of take away. One is accept yourself, forgive yourself for anything and everything that you've done before. You're going to do better. It's fine. And you are worthy. You're more than enough.
Fabulous. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And in terms of, if anybody's listening that would love to connect with you and the work that you do around loving the unlovable, what's your best contact information, Alexis?
You can find me on, you can find me on Instagram. Let's do that. And it's just at alexis.donkin.
At alexis.donkin. Thank you so much, Alexis. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being vulnerable, in being courageous enough to share your own personal experiences as well as your wise, wonderful learnings as a result of going through what you've been through yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So it just leaves me to say, listeners, that true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group Two Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.